time for another Jeremy James story. And this story is called Jeremy James Feeds an Elephant. So we know that Jeremy James has already met an elephant because an elephant came and sat on Daddy's car and squashed it. Do you remember that? But this time he sees an elephant in the zoo. It was one of those bright blue sky birdsong days when Mummy suddenly remembered that fresh air was good for you, and the whole family hadn't been out for days, weeks and months. "Let's go to the zoo," she said. Jeremy James smiled. "What, today?" said Daddy. Jeremy James frowned. "Yes, today," said Mummy. "We could do with some fresh air, and anyway we haven't been out for days, weeks, months." "But it's Saturday," said Daddy. "I know," said Mummy. "Well, the place will be crowded, and I suppose there's a football match on the television," said Mummy. "Well, yes, as it happens there is, but..." And so Mummy, Daddy and Jeremy James went to the zoo. Jeremy James loved the zoo. And most of the time, Mummy and Daddy behaved quite well when they went to the zoo. Probably because they liked it too. The only trouble was they all liked different things. Daddy would settle in front of the lion's cage and start talking about noble beasts in captivity or something. And they would have to drag him away, or he'd stay there until sleeping time. Mummy was fascinated by the birds with their bright feathers and would start talking about colourful nature, patterns, grace, something like that. And then she had to be dragged away. But what annoyed Jeremy James most was that both Mummy and Daddy loved the monkeys. And whilst he and Mummy could drag Daddy away from the lions, and he and Daddy could drag Mummy away from the birds, he, all on his own, hadn't got a chance of dragging both Mummy and Daddy away from the monkeys. Today, Mummy and Daddy were extra keen on the monkeys. "Oh, look at that!" shrieked Mummy as an ugly creature with a sore bottom jumped onto a rubber tyre and grinned. "Oh, they're a scream," said Daddy. But they weren't a scream at all. The fact was that they didn't do anything that Jeremy James couldn't do just as well. But when the monkeys did it, Mummy and Daddy laughed and thought it was wonderful. And when Jeremy James did it, he simply got told off. Only that very morning he had done a magnificent leap from the sofa onto Daddy's armchair, not to mention braving the raging river 1,000 feet below, and had merely been told not to jump on the furniture. Not a laugh, not a clap, just don't jump on the furniture. And when he swung from an apple tree, did they gaze at him with love and admiration in their eyes? No. They either didn't watch him at all, or if they did, they simply shouted, "Mind the apples, Jeremy James," or "If you tear your trousers, you'll see what you'll get." And as for bananas, that was the unfairest cheat of all. They gave bananas to the monkeys, just to see how they peeled them. And when the monkeys peeled their bananas, Mummy and Daddy would grin at each other and say how clever the monkeys were. But if Jeremy James asked for a banana, which he could peel 100 times quicker than any old monkey, they'd say, "Wait until tea time." And that was that. Mummy and Daddy had got stuck in front of the monkeys. They would be there all day, and that was a fact. And Jeremy James couldn't see the joke or the point. So Jeremy James waited until one of the monkeys was being particularly clever, beating his chest and showing his teeth, which was apparently a marvellous trick that had all the grown-ups roaring with laughter. And he slipped away into the crowd and off in the direction of the elephant house. Elephants, after all, were the biggest animals, and they were easily the most interesting. Elephants could do things that Jeremy James couldn't do at all, like squirting water all over themselves, picking up buns with their noses, and squashing cars. Elephants were really talented, not like monkeys. There were lots of people in the elephant house, which wasn't a house at all, but a great sort of playground with rails in it and a ditch on the other side of the rails. The elephants could just about reach the rail with their trunks and sniff up the buns and things that people were giving them. Dad never let Jeremy James feed any animals because he said there were notices everywhere with "Don't feed the animals" written on them. But Daddy was the only one who ever saw these notices, and it was obvious that even if there were notices, the animals couldn't have written them, so they were unfair. Everyone likes buns and sweets and biscuits and things, and the animals like them too, so Daddy was probably just being mean. In his pocket, Jeremy had 2 slices of bread. He had smuggled them out of the house. They weren't ordinary bread. They were bread with currants in. The sort of bread that elephants would dream about. And he brought them just for the elephants. And although he'd have liked a bite or two himself, especially of a curranty bit, he could see the expression on the elephant's face already, and he knew that the elephant knew that the currant bread was for him. So Jeremy James didn't take a single bite, not even to taste it. "Here," said Jeremy James, and he reached out both slices at once. And the elephant made a very silly mistake. He took both slices with a snappy, creepy, snuffly whiff of Jeremy James's hand. But between hand and mouth, very foolishly, he forgot there were 2. He tossed one into his mouth, and the other he let fall right at the edge of the ditch on the ground. "Hey," said Jeremy James, "don't forget the other slice." But the elephant, who must have been a very silly elephant, not only forgot it, but also ignored Jeremy James completely. He just turned his head away and looked around for someone else to feed him. And Jeremy James's second slice of currant bread lay all by itself, uneaten, at the edge of the ditch. "There! Look!" shouted Jeremy James. "On the edge of the ditch! Look!" shouted Jeremy James. "Opposite your foot!" shouted Jeremy James. The elephant nearly trod on it, but still didn't see it. Jeremy James remembered one of Daddy's words. "It's opposite your bloomin' foot," he shouted. But the elephant didn't take any notice. There was only one thing Jeremy James could do. After all, a slice of currant bread is a slice of currant bread, and you don't smuggle currant bread out of the house just to leave it lying at the edge of a ditch. Look, oh, there's the elephant. And there's all of the people. "You're a silly elephant," said Jeremy James as he slipped through the railings. "You're as silly as those monkeys." Look, there's Jeremy James going in between the railings. And there, under the elephant's foot, is the other piece of currant bread. Jeremy James reached the edge of the ditch, and a great shout went up from the crowd behind as he picked up the slice of currant bread. Then everything seemed to go very quiet indeed. So quiet that Jeremy James turned around to see what was wrong. But all the people were still there. They were just quiet, that was all. "Here," said Jeremy James, holding up the currant bread. "Come on, you silly elephant," said Jeremy James. The elephant slowly turned his head, at last spotted the currant bread, and scrappy, creepy, snuffily whiffed it out of Jeremy James's hand. "And about time too," said Jeremy James. Then he turned around and squeezed back through the railings straight into the grip of a man wearing a zookeeper uniform, a moustache, and a red face. "Where's your mother and father?" said the moustache. "I expect they're still wasting their time watching those monkeys," said Jeremy James. But just at that moment, Mummy and Daddy arrived, and their faces looked rather red too when they saw Jeremy James. And they both said at the same time, "Where have you been?" And then the moustache said something to them. And then Daddy said something to the moustache. And then the moustache said something to Daddy, which made Daddy's face go very red. And then Daddy said something to Mummy. And Mummy, rather roughly, jerked Jeremy James's arm and led him away from the elephant house, leaving Daddy and the moustache talking together in loud voices. You must never, said Mummy, never, never, never go through fences or try to touch the animals. You understand? They're very dangerous. You could have been killed. Well, I was only giving him a piece of bread that he had dropped, said Jeremy James. And if he hadn't been such a silly elephant, I wouldn't have had to have gone and got it for him. But there wasn't really much point in trying to explain it to Mummy, because she didn't have much clue about animals. Someone who prefers monkeys to elephants can't be expected to understand elephants or little boys if it comes to that. So that's what happened when Jeremy James went to the zoo. I hope when you go to the zoo, you stay with your mummy and daddy and you don't try to slip through the railings of the elephant house. Bye bye.